Own it sooner with no additional fees, no charges, and no credit. 6 months, same as cash on the brands you want, only at Rent-A-Center.
Centrally located at the Tri-City Shopping Center in Redlands. Call 909-335-6622. That number again, 909-335-6622. Rent-A-Center, where the 10 and the 210 meet in the Tri-City Shopping Center.
Wet n Wild Palm Springs is the one where you get big water park fun. Yeah, dive into all the action-packed thrills with exciting rides, slippery slides, cool water adventures, and so many ways to just chill. So get everyone together and get to Wet n Wild Palm Springs. For unlimited fun, get a season pass. Buy now, get a free ticket for a friend, and more. All for just $64.99 at wetandwildpalmsprings.com or at Food for Less. Offer ends soon. Park open daily.
If you're looking for a full or part-time sales position and you have radio, TV, or print media experience, KCAA has a great opportunity waiting for you that pays the highest commissions in the market. KCAA is the only station in the IE that broadcasts on 3 frequencies, so advertisers receive 3 ads for 1 low rate. This makes KCAA a must-buy for every local business. If you're interested in a sales position with us, email ceo@kcaaradio.com.
Hey guys, this is Andrew Caravella. Just wanted to let you know that KCAA has a new listener line for all of you that have a phone. Now you can listen to KCAA in the grocery store, in the doctor's office, or when you want to pretend you're on the phone with someone just so that creeper will leave you alone. Call 720-835-3099 today and listen to your favorite KCAA radio shows. That number again, 720-835-3099. KCAA Radio, the station that leaves no caller or listener behind. Are you ready for a new experience? To see life from another point of view? New hope, new expression, new joy. This is your radio hour. Welcome to Viewpoint with Father John.
And welcome, friends. You are tuned to KCAA Radio, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, or on the World Wide Web at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John, and I am your host, Father John Reid. By the way, you can follow us on Facebook on Viewpoint with Father John. Why don't you go and click on our page so you can help join our family here, and you can also help support this program, which is listener supported, by going to www.viewpointwithfatherjohn.com. Click on the support button, and you can be a part of this family. All of God's children are endowed with extraordinary purpose and ability. I'm on a quest to help as many as possible in fully realizing their divinely inspired potential. Disposing of false narrative and embracing genuineness inspires clarity of purpose. My role is to help overcome self-imposed limitations in realizing one's spiritual potential. We do have a couple things in the news tonight. If you haven't heard already, it's kind of sad news on one hand, but good news for her. She's with our Heavenly Father now. But Aretha Franklin this morning had died in her home. She had a form of pancreatic cancer. And she has been an incredible gift to the music world and to this country, and she will be greatly missed. So I hope that sometime tonight you will go to your favorite source of music, after the show, of course, and listen to some of her music. Also, on political news, actually over 300 news sources today in printed news all put out statements against the idea of fake news, that the fourth establishment of America, our media, is not putting out fake news, unless you're talking about Fox, of course. And so it was nice to see them push back a little bit, because it's important that we stay informed of what's going on in the world around us. And we know that we can trust these sources pretty well, but that doesn't make up for not researching. So when you hear something, whether you hear it from me or somebody else, remember, research it. Do some critical thinking. And stay informed, because an uninformed nation is a doomed nation. Well, tonight I'm really excited. I have a guest this evening who is not only a friend, but is a hero of mine, one of the best retreat directors I've ever had the privilege of being on a retreat with. In fact, at one time, he did a wonderful retreat with some of the priests I was serving with when I was with another diocese. And he's also a spiritual care director. My friend tonight and guest is John McAndrew. John, say hello to folks.
Thank you, John. That's a very kind introduction.
Well, it's a treat to have you on the show tonight. And let's talk a little bit about what you do. You do spiritual care counseling in the hospice realm. You not only bring some guidance, you bring some music and some good cheer. Tell us a little bit about your ministry.
Yeah, I'm working with Wilshire Hospice here in San Luis Obispo, and we're a large medical nonprofit hospice. We do an awful lot of education. My role as a member of the hospice team is I'm a spiritual counselor, and what that means is we meet people where they are. We don't do any preaching or proselytizing. We try to help people engage with their own spiritual truth that they found deep down within. And as a member of the hospice team, I work with doctors, nurses, social workers, home health aides, volunteers, just a whole group of folks who are there to assist people at the end of life. Because obviously that's a time when a lot of people are doing some reconsidering of some of their long-held beliefs. So
yes.
It's very exciting work, and thank God I don't do it alone.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk a little bit about your spiritual background. Now, you grew up in California?
Most of it. I can't say I'm native, but since the age of 3, I've been in Southern California all that time.
What'd you do the first 3 years?
My parents, I'm one of 8, so my parents were very busy. I've got 7 siblings, and there were 4 of us in 5 years. So I think my parents were very busy. But we settled in Orange County, and were able to make a real nice, comfortable home in Santa Ana, Tustin area, and so I grew up there. And we're very close, loving Catholic family. Went to Catholic schools, and in fact, I was counting up my years of Catholic education the other day. I had 21 years of Catholic education now.
Mercy.
I'm overeducated.
Well, it reminds me of the first oxymoron I ever learned was Sister of Mercy. My knuckles can prove that.
Ow.
Sounds like you had a few of those nuns yourself, huh?
I was really lucky because I had some of the most wonderful, gracious, beautiful. I often think of most of the significant teachers of my life have been women, and it began with the sisters in my grammar school. So I was very lucky to have received that kind of education.
Oh, that is a real blessing. And so you grew up under the Catholic system, the Church of Rome. I have to make the definition because a lot of my listeners know I'm Eastern Orthodox, and they know that both are ordained Catholic priests.
Right.
And so at one time I even tried to recruit you, I think, when you were leaving Rome.
I believe you did. I had, when I left active ministry as a priest in the Diocese of Orange in 2004, and it was really... I was so grateful then and now for our friendship, but for the support that you gave me at that time. It was a very difficult time, leaving active ministry as a priest. I had committed my life to that.
Yes.
And that was, it was a big turning point. But it allowed me to really dig deep within and discover the spiritual truth that I've been looking at all my life.
Absolutely. And on a personal level, I think you've known me long enough to know that if I don't mean it, I don't say it. And you really have been one of my heroes as a retreat facilitator. In fact, I've plagiarized much of what you do, particularly your song for Oh God, Remove My Fear and Direct My Attention to What You'd Have Me Be. I just used it on a retreat at Sarah.
Oh, wonderful.
And,
yeah.
And
which, of course, I stole that prayer directly from a very important sacred text that we share in common.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm pleased to say that since I spoke with you on Monday, I received another email from Father Mel booking me for another retreat next year at Sarah. So
Wonderful.
I guess they're going to feed me again. So,
Well, you have a great gift as well, and not only with this show, but also with the work that you do in retreats and ministry. I'm grateful to call you a friend over these many years. I was looking back; it's probably 25 years or so,
yes,
at least.
at least. Well, I can remember when I was director of California Adolescent Recovery Ranch, Car Ranch, and I had a young man who was struggling with his faith. He had been raised Roman Catholic. I believe you were at St. Norberg at the time, if memory serves.
Okay, right.
And I drove him out, and you were just incredibly helpful to him in discovering spirituality, and that it's not all about rules.
Right.
And I remember having the conversation I had with that young man on the way back to the facility, and I was deeply moved by how much you were able to take some serious weight off the shoulders of this guy. He'd really been raised with some strict stuff, and you know, sometimes when we're in a sick environment, we learn sick things, and he had a lot of that, a lot of addiction in his home, and I will be forever grateful for what you did for that young man, because you absolutely changed his life with the love you shared with him. Excuse me.
Well, I'm very grateful because I was given that love, and that you can't really share something you haven't got, and that sustaining love, I think, has made all the difference in my life. It allowed me to not only preach a God of unconditional love, but to actually believe it in my heart. You know, that there's nothing that I could do that would make God love me any more than He does right now. Right?
Absolutely.
No, there's nothing I could go spend hours in mystical trance, but God doesn't love me anymore. And the flip side of that coin, there's nothing that I could ever do to make God stop loving me.
Right.
And that's, I think, the hardest part for many of us. We think, I don't know, I could think of a few things. But in fact, my experience has taught me that unconditional love of God, that merciful God, that is God's justice. That is really what, when the prophets throughout the Hebrew Scriptures talk about God's justice, tzedakah, I think is the Hebrew word. I'm not much of a Hebrew scholar, but they're really talking about God's desire to make things right, to restore all of creation.
Yes.
And that works on an inner level as well. That's really what I believe the God of my understanding is busy doing in my life and in our world. Even sometimes I wonder about our world, but
we all do.
I believe that is a restorative power at work there.
And that's the important element that, from where I come from, is the restorative. Because if we're just into being punitive, we miss the whole mark of what it's about. I think of in Isaiah and Ezekiel, and every time God is moved to anger in the Hebrew Scriptures, as you so well brought up, He always responds with, "I will love you so much you won't be able to stand it." And I'm rephrasing that.
Right. That's and we can walk away from it, but we can't ignore that love. You know, it's. I believe that I was given a gift, and that gift has allowed me to make decisions. When, just for example, having served 18 years as a priest in the Diocese of Orange, when I made that very painful decision to leave active ministry, I actually was able to do that because of that inner conviction of unconditional love. I just knew, and I think I said it at my very last Mass, in the homily at my very last Mass, that God isn't going to love me any more or less if I stay or if I go.
Yes.
That love of God, that unconditional love, that's a standpoint. And even though it was a painful decision to make, and there's still all kinds of residual shame that comes with that in the Catholic tradition. We're not supposed to think like that, and yet people do. So.
Well, yeah, and I get that. And the only one that's a little further than that, because, we always got to compete with each other, because our churches start out one was the Orthodox. I was on retreat a few years back, and I forget who the priest was, but he'd asked me to do one of the readings at Mass, and I was having a really bad spasm in my back, and so I was unable to do it, and I apologized. And when I apologized the second time, he said, "You already said you're sorry." I said, "Look, we're 3 years older than you guys are, and we have 3 years more of guilt. Just live with it." Anything we do, we want to do a little bit better than you, right?
Right.
So, well, speaking about coming and going, we're at our first commercial break. My guest tonight is my dear friend John McAndrew, one of my heroes, and we'll be back in 2 and 2.
The loss of a loved one is one of the most challenging experiences in a person's life. It's hard to know where to turn to make your loved one's final arrangements. Jesse Ruiz at Personal Funeral Planning in Ontario will treat you and your loved one with the respect you deserve. Jesse served in the Marine Corps in Desert Storm and understands what it takes to provide loyal, personalized, and empathetic service to those who need it most. The families of Michael Jackson, Brittany Murphy, Ed McMahon, and many others have trusted Jesse to provide them with the highest level of service and support. To work with Jesse, call 909-762-4027, 909-762-4027, or visit their website, www.4pfp.org. www.4pfp as in personal funeral planning.org. Jesse Ruiz and Personal Funeral Planning, veteran-owned and operated, helping you plan a personal, lasting tribute for your loved one. www.4pfp.org.
Every day is a great day at KCAA Radio. August 16th is National Tell a Joke Day. What would be better than a day filled with laughter? National Tell a Joke Day is observed annually on August 16th, and that's no joke. This day is generally filled with smiles and much laughter from morning till night as everyone shares their favorite jokes. The more jokes you tell, the more fun you will have, and so will those around you. For example, in a Catholic school cafeteria, a nun places a note in front of a pile of apples. "Only take one. God is watching," the note says. Now, further down the line is a pile of cookies. A little boy makes his own note saying, "Take all you want. God is watching the apples." For KCAA NBC Radio, I'm Andrew Caravella, and this has been The More You Know.
Here at the Del Walmsley Radio Show, where the hype ends and the help begins, tune in Monday through Friday at 11 a.m. I'll show you how you can retire in 5 years or less, right here on KCAA 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, and 106.5 FM.
I'm so tired of the buffering on my smartphone.
I'm so over it. Next.
Right? I am so over it. Next.
A radio? Next.
No buffering, just your favorite local radio station?
Next Radio uses the FM tuner that is already built into your phone, so you can listen to your favorite stations on the go. Because Next Radio uses the FM tuner already built into your smartphone, it saves on data and battery usage. When compared to streaming audio, Next Radio uses less than a tenth of your data, and your battery will last 3 times longer. Next Radio, it's FM radio on your smartphone.
Introducing a radio inside your cell phone. Listen to all kinds of local radio stations, including KCAA 106.5 Yucaipa and 102.3 Riverside on Next Radio. Download the free Next Radio app today. 100% free, 100% fun, 0% buffering. Stop the buffer and listen to KCAA.
And welcome back. You are tuned to KCAA Radio, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, or on the World Wide Web at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John. I am your host, Father John Reid. Just a couple announcements before we get back to our guest. Martha Bass and I will be doing another workshop in the People's Republic of Claremont. That will be on October 6th at the UCC Church. I believe that's where we're going to have it. So far, that's how it looks. And we'll be continuing our workshop on empowering your life. Last one was on forgiveness, and this is more of how to make your life whole. So it will extend on that forgiveness and bring it through so that you can find more ways to become one. Now, I have to make a disclaimer before I reintroduce my guest, John McAndrew. We did not know that commercial was in the lineup about God watching the apples and not the cookies. But it seemed rather apropos with what we're talking about tonight. So, John, welcome back to the show. And let's talk a little bit more about your background. Now, you have a degree in literature, don't you?
In college, I went to St. Mary's College in Moraga and was an English major and kind of fascinated by language, even to this day. And I was sort of focused on poetry. You know, that's the kind of major that'll really guarantee you good employment. So I graduated in 1975 from St. Mary's College with a degree in English Lit, and didn't quite know what I was going to do at that point. So I was looking around. I ended up teaching for about 4 years in a Catholic school down in Costa Mesa, and discovered there my real vocation is teaching. And that's it's very flattering to hear you talk about your experience with the retreats that I've done, and I think that's really because it is my vocation. It is my calling to work with people, and especially teaching in the spiritual realm.
Yes.
And it's taken me most of my life to be comfortable enough to say that and to think of myself as a spiritual teacher. That doesn't mean that I have some special wisdom, but you're familiar with Sunryu Suzuki? He's the teacher who brought Zen to the West.
Yes, in fact, he was very involved with Thomas Merton, wasn't he?
He was they had a good correspondence. But there's a quote of his that I find very helpful. He says, "The task of the spiritual teacher is to bear witness to the seeker that what the seeker seeks is real." Ooh,
that's
so
deep.
The task of the spiritual teacher, the job, if you want to be a spiritual, is to bear witness. That's the primary role that we have, to bear witness to the seeker that what the seeker seeks is real. What you're looking for is real.
Yes.
And that in that way, in that kind of bearing witness, we allow people to go deep within and to access their own experience and their values and the principles and the practices that will allow them to thrive and grow as spiritual beings.
Well, I think in doing that requires us to do our spiritual work so we do have something to offer to them.
Exactly.
Because I think we've both seen, I'm making an assumption there, forgive me, that we've both seen people who see what clergy do and they just jump up to do that without any preparation, and they wonder why the credibility isn't there. And I'm not talking about the egotistical credibility. I'm talking about the ability to connect at the heart level. And
right.
If you don't do the spiritual work behind that, the heart doesn't open up enough for that, in my humble opinion.
Well, I think that's the real process of opening ourselves spiritually is telling our stories. And we're just hungry. Everybody is hungry to tell our stories and to hear stories that will help us to tell our own stories.
Yes.
And that's really been so much of my experience in the last 35 years of recovery, and also I'm looking at the great spiritual teachers of the world, including Jesus. He's a storyteller.
Yes.
This seems to be the most the clearest, simplest way to transmit spiritual ideas. The story.
Yes, and to build on that a little bit, a radio show I used to be a part of before this show we did a whole series or a whole evening on comedy in the Bible, and people didn't realize that there's comedy in the Bible. And I tried to explain to the listeners that our Jewish brothers and sisters teach with humor. And when you look at the Hebrew scriptures, one of the problems is, and my listeners are used to hearing me say this, but it's like trying to translate a joke from Spanish to English. And in Spanish, you see people just cracking up. My wife's looking at me right now, who is Hispanic. Like, I better get this part right. But you hear it in English, and we think that's not funny. What are they laughing about? And, and I always like to give the example of Jonah and the whale, which is really Jonah and the fish in the original Hebrew. And that just like in Spanish soap operas, the name of the character is opposite of what the character is like. You know, chastity is anything but. And of course, Jonah is the faithful one, the obedient one. And what does he do? Instead of going to Nineveh, he goes the opposite way.
Right.
And what makes it so funny in Hebrew, and forgive me for preaching to the choir, I know you got this in your education, was when he finally goes over the side of the ship and he's swallowed by this fish, not a whale, but a fish, it was a boy fish. But because now it has Jonah in the belly, he's now become a female fish because it's pregnant with Jonah. And the humor in Hebrew about that is he was so stubborn, he changed the gender of a fish before he would do God's will, before he would surrender.
Yes.
And all through not just what we call the Old Testament, but the New Testament, a lot of people don't realize in a lot of Jesus' story, he's throwing in a lot of humor that we lose in translation. There's some really good stuff that would help us really understand what he's talking about if we got the humor behind it. What's your experience with that, Ben?
Exactly. I think when we can laugh, we seem more receptive to learning. That's been my experience. And then when we learn how to laugh at ourselves, that really seems to be a pathway to opening our hearts up. I remember seeing a production, years ago when I was in the seminary, a British actor, and I can't remember his name, and he did a one-man show called The Gospel of Mark. And he walked on stage with a stool, a little table, a pitcher of water, and he recited the King James version of the Gospel of Mark.
Wow.
Now, that sounds like it could be just deadly, boring. It was absolutely brilliant. We laughed, we wept. It was sometimes we forget that the gospel is a story.
Yes.
And to hear it told as a story brought home that truth to me so vividly.
I'd love to see that done by Mark Twain.
Yeah. There. That would be fun.
Maybe we get that guy, Alan, I can't think of his last name now, but he does a one-man show of Mark Twain, and that should be something we should send to him and say, why don't you do Mark Twain doing this?
Very interesting. Very interesting.
It would be. And, it's funny. People get really mad when you start talking about biblical translation and the way I was taught. It wasn't by intent, but there was over 10,000 mistakes in translation to King James.
Oh, sure.
And I remember saying that at a liturgy one morning, and I had somebody call me up who was of another faith and was visiting the church and actually wanted to have a physical confrontation with me over that statement. I said, well, that won't change the facts. It just, but we... And I think that's a real problem with spiritual growth. If we're not willing to be open and to see that there might be more than one way of looking at things.
Right.
And we can both be right at the same time and we can both be wrong at the same time. There's a lot of room for that.
That seems to be the heart of spirituality is encountering and embracing paradox.
Yes.
And we're living in a culture and in a time where most people don't seem to get any training in that. We're still very locked into black and white, either or dualistic thinking, and there's really not much spiritual growth available when we're stuck in that. And I know Richard Rohr, who's a great teacher of mine, and I know you're familiar with his work.
Oh, yes.
He talks about how important it is that we understand the non-dual nature of not only of Jesus' teaching, but of all authentic spiritual truth.
Yes.
And until we can embrace paradox, we really don't grow much spiritually.
I get teased by some of the guys in the men's group that I have at my house on Monday nights because I have a whole section of my library that's nothing but Richard Rohr. And then you get past Richard Rohr, and it's Anthony DeMello. Then after DeMello, it's John Philip Newell. So
Okay, so you've got some good teachers.
so they say, we know you're Irish, but you're taking this Celtic too far with Newell. So
right.
So that's really good stuff. I'm glad you mentioned Richard Rohr, and I've emailed with him a few times back and forth. A wonderful man, very humble man.
Yeah.
And he speaks to me in such a deep way about getting out of either or and getting into and to be able to look past what we see and to allow ourselves to have an experience. And I love the fact he quite often quotes question 16 of the Baltimore Catechism, which for my listeners who may not know what that is and think it's funny that an Orthodox boy would know this, that, where's God? And as you remember from your upbringing,
God is everywhere.
God is everywhere. And or when I really want to make someone with a degree in English language, there is no spot where God is not. I apologize. I know it's terrible grammar. But I'm dyslexic. I can get away with it. So I think that's why I was able to study Aramaic so easily, is because it goes the other way.
Yeah. See?
And when I was studying Aramaic and doing some translation running it through Aramaic, it's amazing how it changes the scripture with the idioms. If I can give you a quick example of that, I'm not trying to preach to the choir here, but when I did the translation with the idioms of the Lord's Prayer, and I did this for a rabbi and a cantor, and they got very excited about it, I said the way we really should say it is, Our Father, who's throughout the universe, sacred and holy is your name. Your kingdom is come. Your will is done on earth as you desire in heaven. You give us bread for our needs day to day. Forgive us our trespasses as we have already forgiven those who trespass against us. And let us not enter into temptation, but deliver us from error. For it belongs to you as a song of praise from all ages to all ages. And they got very excited. He said, yes, that's a Jewish prayer. Jesus is Jewish.
Yes, a very good Jewish prayer.
Yeah, and I think when we get caught up in saying that this is the only way that it can be, and we forget that Scripture is supposed to be given with midrash, where we can constantly be questioning, does it mean this? Does it mean that? Does it mean both? I think that's a real area in our culture right now that's missing, and it's harming us greatly. But the voices are starting to come up again. You mentioned Richard Rohr. He's certainly a fantastic voice of this. I've heard you on retreats share it. I've heard Tom Weston share it, Terry Ritchie, other people who I really look up to, talk about the expansiveness of consciousness.
Right.
Now, you're also a heck of a musician, too, by the way.
Well, thank you, John. Love that. I've been playing music all my life, and I'm one of those who it's a gift. I can say that in all honesty. I remember I was about 13 or 14, and I watched when the Beatles were on. I think it was on Ed Sullivan playing. They did the very first music video, and it was Let It Be. Paul McCartney sitting at the piano playing Let It Be, and I watched, and I ran into the other room when it was done, and I sat down and I was able to play it pretty much note for note.
Wow.
And, and at that moment I realized, I guess not everybody can do that. So I was. It took me a long time to really embrace that gift, but I'm so grateful for it. I think music is probably the simplest way to pray. for me. Just to allow music. I love that in our hospice care team, we have full-time hospice musicians, and they're part of the spiritual care.
Good.
And because we see that as I'm kind of biased. I think prayer is the best medicine, but music may be the second best. It's just good medicine. And when we look at caring for people at the end of life, we're not trying to cure them. We're trying to find what will give them peace and comfort, and just having somebody play music in front of you. It's a very different experience than putting on a CD and plugging your headphones in.
Yes, it is.
To actually be present to music is a wonderful, wonderful gift. So I've tried to incorporate music in a lot of the things that I do, and I'm tickled to hear you talk about the fear prayer that you. Oh God, remove my fears and direct my attention to what you would have me be.
Yeah.
A wonderful prayer. Just repeat as needed.
Well, and absolutely. And, I've used that with some of my counseling clients, and I've given them the melody. And I find that when I'm going through great times of stress, I find myself either whistling that or humming it or singing it softly until that fear is removed. And I remember you saying to me, and then we got to go to a break, you were explaining one time that we ask God to remove our fear and then direct our attention to what he'd have us be, because otherwise, wherever God moves the fear, we try to look for it. And
right.
So then so then we have to have God direct our attention to what he'd have us be. And I remember you asking me one time, well, what would God have you be? And I looked at you kind of puzzled, and you said, happy, joyous, and free. And that's meant a great deal to me. Speaking of happy, joyous, and free, we're at our next commercial break. My guest is John McAndrew, my friend and hero, and we'll be back in 2 and 2.
The loss of a loved one is one of the most challenging experiences in a person's life. It's hard to know where to turn to make your loved one's final arrangements. Jesse Ruiz at Personal Funeral Planning in Ontario will treat you and your loved one with the respect you deserve. Jesse served in the Marine Corps in Desert Storm and understands what it takes to provide loyal, personalized, and empathetic service to those who need it most. The families of Michael Jackson, Brittany Murphy, Ed McMahon, and many others have trusted Jesse to provide them with the highest level of service and support. To work with Jesse, call 909-762-4027, 909-762-4027, or visit their website, www.4pfp.org. www.4pfp as in personalfuneralplanning.org. Jesse Ruiz and Personal Funeral Planning, veteran-owned and operated, helping you plan a personal, lasting tribute for your loved one. www.4pfp.org.
The Queen of Soul has died. This is your entertainment wrap-up for NBC News Radio. I'm Andrew Caravella. Aretha Franklin, the first woman to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and known as the Queen of Soul for powerful anthems like Respect and Chain of Fools, died Thursday morning at her home in Detroit. She was 76. Franklin died of pancreatic cancer. The singer's publicist said in a statement issued by the family, a professional singer and accomplished pianist by her late teens, a superstar by her mid-20s, Franklin had long ago settled any arguments over who was the greatest popular vocalist of her time. Her gifts, natural and acquired, were a multi-octave mezzo-soprano, gospel passion, and training worthy of a preacher's daughter. Taste sophisticated and eccentric, and the courage to channel private pain into liberating song. Franklin leaves a music legacy with 18 Grammy Awards, 3 NAACP Image Awards, the Kennedy Center Honors in 1994, and the Presidential Medal of Honor from President George W. Bush in 2005. Now in other news, Disney is holding firm on shooting down the possibility of Gunn returning to direct the next installment of Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm sure you've heard this one in the news. According to Variety, Walt Disney Studio Chairman Alan Horn recently met with director Gunn, and while the get-together helped clear the air over the decision to let him go, Horn stood firm on his original verdict.
Looks like we're not getting paid.
The third Guardians movie is still expected to go into production in 2019, reportedly using Gunn's existing script, though any new direction brought in might put their own spin on it. And that is your entertainment wrap-up for NBC News Radio. I'm Andrew Caravella.
And welcome back. You are tuned to KCAA Radio, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, or on the World Wide Web at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John, and I am your host, Father John Reid. And just a reminder, this is a listener-supported program, so please go to www.viewpointwithfatherjohn.com. Go to the support button, click it, and give whatever you can. Help keep us on the air. For those of you who've been contributing, I want to thank you from the very bottom of my heart. It's because of you we're still on the air, and I'm very grateful for that. This is, again, we have some workshops coming up. There's going to be one with Martha and I coming up in October. On the 6th, which is a Saturday. Come on out to Claremont. You can go to the website, and we'll be doing some posting on there, if I can get my lips to work, that never rent from a dollar store to get lips. And so, again, my guest tonight is my good friend and my hero, John McAndrew. We're talking a little bit about his background in the spiritual world, and as a spiritual teacher and just a good guy all the way around. And so, what brought you to hospice work?
Well, when I left active ministry as a priest, I really wasn't certain what I was going to do, but I knew that it needed to have that ministerial component, and I just happened into this. It was one of those little coincidences. You know the definition of coincidence, right?
Yes. Miracle or God decided to remain anonymous.
Right. So it was one of those. And I began working with, at the time it was called Hospice Partners of the Central Coast, now called Wilshire Hospice, in San Luis Obispo. And I actually began and was trained as a hospice musician, and then started working full-time as a spiritual counselor. So it was a wonderful introduction to hospice care, minus all of the trappings of the sacramental life that I was more familiar with. I'd certainly been with a number of people at the end of life doing the sacrament of anointing of the sick.
Good.
And being present. But hospice care asked something different of me. It asked me to be present in a different way. And there was a tremendous amount of growth in that experience.
Oh, that's great. Now, you do more retreats than any active priest I know. I get mailers quite often in the email, which I love getting. If I had more time off on weekends, I'd be stalking you to be at these things because they're really good. For any of my listeners who would like to attend some of your workshops, how would they get in touch with you?
The easiest way would probably be visiting the Sensible Spirituality website. Sensible Spirituality is a project that I form of my good friend Joseph Palacios. He's a priest in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, and he actually came and worked with me for a while at Betty Ford Center when I was director of spiritual care there.
Oh, yeah.
And while we were there, we were just talking about our experience of trying to help people in recovery, finding, and he used the expression, we need to find a sensible spirituality. And I said, yeah, that's the project. That's what we need to do. So we began at that point putting together, certainly I've been doing retreats, and Joseph as well, for a long time, and we began to look at what are the components of a sensible spirituality, and we recognized that it really didn't have much to do with some of the religious language that seemed to trip people up.
Right.
But we wanted to focus instead on values and principles and practices. What are the things that sustain you? And in doing that, we realized that there's really kind of three stages. There's first a foundational story. Everybody has that, where you came from, where you lived and you're born into, faith tradition, things like that. That's our foundational story. Everybody's got one. But
Right.
then there's always an evolving story. What's happening now? What's new? This is often at times of transition. People will pause and consider what's coming around right now. So the evolving story, of course, always has to build on the foundational story. And ultimately, working with people, we try to help them to find a story that will propel them forward, something that will be a new sustaining story. And you've got to include everything. That's one of Richard Rohr's famous slogans. Everything belongs.
Right. It's a great book, too.
Yes, it is a good. And we can't leave anything out. And so that's where as you were talking earlier, the spiritual process of looking at doing an inventory and really looking at all the baggage that we carry with us can be real helpful. So sensible spirituality was our response to that. And the website is www.sensiblespirituality.org. It has a listing of some of the upcoming retreats that I'm doing, and also kind of an overview of the work that I do as a spiritual counselor for people who are going through transition. The spiritual counseling for hospice is that's my day-to-day work, but I also see individual clients doing spiritual counseling, and a lot of people find that very helpful when they're kind of going through some changes.
Yes, I would agree with that. Something you said reminds me of another saying from Richard Rohr, which is, we transcend and include.
Exactly, yeah. We can't. There's another expression that says this is from that other sacred text, we don't regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it.
Right.
We have to be aware that, and especially with spiritual things, that we may reject that particular thing, but it's part of it. I remember hearing the Dalai Lama talking one time, and that he was talking about, the fact that a lot of people were finding Buddhism attractive. People in the West were finding Buddhism attractive. He said, if you're an angry ex-Catholic, maybe you might want to do something about that before you decide to be a Buddhist.
You're right.
So we have to look at what we carry with us, and with sensible spirituality, we're always interested in helping people to retrieve what's of value, even if you no longer want to associate yourself with that denomination or that way of thinking. What of value can you retrieve and bring forward from that?
Yes, exactly. And to discover that what you've been looking for, you've been looking with. It's all in there. It's just sometimes if we can't get past our anger, we can't see the beauty around us. It reminds me of an old story, and I don't know if I got this from Anthony DeMello or where I got it, but it talks about this monastery, and it was the night before graduation, and everyone had reached enlightenment but this one student, this one novice, and they all went to bed, and this guy went back to his cell, and he was just beside himself, and just, why had everyone reached enlightenment but him? And so he went walking in the night because he was just, inconsolable, and he went down to the pond, And there he sat on a log, looking at the reflection of the moon onto the pond. And when he moved his foot, he kicked a little sack. And he picked up the sack and he put his hand inside it and found what he thought might be pebbles. He took one out and he threw it into the middle of the pond. It landed in the water, went bloop, and he watched the ripples, and it was somewhat soothing. So he just sat there and watched it, took out another one, did the same thing, one after another. And then the next morning, his fellow monks were looking for him because they had gone to his cell and found his bed was unslept in, and they were greatly concerned. They knew how disturbed he was. So they went in search of him, and they found him by the pond, just weeping. And they said, "Our brother, what is it?" He said, "Well, last night, in my pain, I came here to the pond, seeking some serenity. And I found what I thought was a bag of rocks, and I started throwing them into the water because it was soothing. But in the light of day, I see they're not rocks at all, but diamonds, and this is my last one." And sometimes we're throwing these what we think are rocks away, and we don't realize they're really diamonds, taking us to a new level. You know,
everything belongs.
Yeah, and Richard Rohr talks a great deal, and I'm glad he's a mutual source, about the two things that open up our heart is great suffering or great love. And
that really has been the significant learning of this last 10 years for me, is the power of grief and loss as an opening to deeper spiritual growth. That it doesn't matter what you believe, whether you go to church or whether you even believe in God. Everybody experiences loss, and grief opens us up. I've come to believe that grief is a universal portal, an opening into a new God consciousness. You don't have to go there.
I like that.
When we experience deep, profound grief, we don't know anything. We really lose our way for a moment, and when we feel. I've heard so many times from families, and, I feel like I'm going crazy, and it's not going crazy, but it's such a profound alteration of reality that people, they just really have to rethink everything. And that's where I've come to understand that grief can be this incredible gift if we can process it through. So I enjoy, that may sound a strange word, I enjoy working with people processing grief, because I've really seen it in my own personal life and in the lives of others as a real opening to something new.
Oh, yes. Well, it reminds me I believe it's the title of a book by Terry Whitaker called Falling Apart is Falling Together.
Yes.
And until we do the great letting go, the great release, we really don't have grasp of anything.
Right. Right.
So sometimes we do have to fall apart so we can fall together, and so that we can look from a different point of view.
It's not a breakdown, it's a breakthrough.
Yes, thank you for saying that. And I think of the old story of the oyster that gets the sand inside it, and it's really irritated, but if it completes the process and doesn't just discard the uncomfortableness of the sand, it eventually turns into a priceless pearl. But we have to complete the experience, bless it, and go on.
Right.
And,
John, what is your pearl of great price?
My pearl of great price has been the priesthood, and the discovery that it wasn't anything that I thought it was going to be.
Right.
And I don't know if that's been your experience as well. But just getting to do what I do now, to finally be comfortable in my own skin, to be in a relationship that truly is built in love, that didn't come easily. I always struggled with relationships because I'm a rescuer, and there's not room for two people in a relationship when you're rescuing.
Right.
And
these are the wonderful lessons of the second half of life, right?
Yes.
And I, too, I'm very grateful as well that I'm sharing life with an absolutely wonderful, beautiful woman who has taught me an awful lot about the depth of my own spirituality. You know?
Yes.
Am I just saying those things, or do I actually live that way? So it's a great learning experience, being in love.
Well, it is, and you know, there's a five-step process that we learn with, and I know you're familiar with this. That first we hear about something, then we gather information, then we get so that we can talk about it, then we get to the next stage, which is feeling what we're saying, and then the stage 5 is living it. And sometimes we'll be at stage 3 and think we're at stage 5, but then we go through some more pain and we discover, oh, this is what it means.
Yeah.
So, and that's why I'm not one that says that you should be in one relationship for life. I mean, for some people that works, but I think that really we have to do some real self-discovery to find a partner in living, not just somebody that the church has said, okay, we endorse this.
Yeah.
Well, we've come up to the end of our hour. John, it's been a great joy having you with us. My guest tonight is John McAndrew. And if I may, if I can post on our website how they can contact you at Sensible Spirituality, I would like to do that if you would text me that.
That's great. www.sensiblespirituality.org.
And for the rest of my listeners, if no one's told you that they loved you this week, let me be the first. Thank you for spending this time with us, and we'll be back with you next week.
KCAA Loma Linda, 1050 AM, 106.5 FM, and now 102.3 FM.